Hi, good morning, my kindergarten friends. It is Mrs. Foster, also known as the Math Queen. I hope all of you are having a good week. Yes, I know I'm in my robe, but I have showered. I've done my workout this morning. I'm just cold, so I love it. It's nice and snuggly. So, all right, my kindergarten mathematicians, let's go over expectations. Point to your brain and say, we think. Frame that face and say, we act. And then make that talking sign and say, we talk like a mathematician. And remember, a mathematician is just a person who studies numbers and shapes. Now, before we get ready to warm up our brain, I really want you to be, when you're using your Connect 5 or you're going through your Clever, I want you working on Dreambox. It's an excellent math program that has lots and lots of activities, and I check every single day to see who's been using Dreambox. It really is going to help grow your math brain. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I have some 10 frames, and remember, a 10 frame has 5 squares on the top row. It has 5 squares on the bottom row, and all together there's 10 altogether. So today I'm going to flash you, and I'm going to ask you how many squares had dots in them and how many squares were empty. That'll help us learn the parts of tens. Are you ready? Here we go. How many squares had dots? And then how many of the squares were empty? All right, let's check. 4 squares had dots, so that means there's 1 empty on the bottom and 1 empty on the top and 5 empty on the bottom, and 5 plus 1 is 6. So 4 dots and 6 empty squares. Here comes our next one. How many squares had dots and how many squares were empty? This is a really easy one. How many squares had dots? 5. That top row was completely filled. How many squares didn't have dots? 5. And we know 5 plus 5 equals 10. Okay, here comes our next one. How many squares had dots? And so then how many squares were empty? Okay, so let's look. It's really easy to tell. We had 2 squares that had dots. Well, you know that 2 and 3 make 5, so there were 3 empty and 5 down here. 5, 6, 7, 8. So 2 were empty, or 2 had dots and 8 were empty, and there was 10 altogether. We'll just do a couple more of these. Here comes the next one. Give you a little bit longer look there. How many squares had dots? And how many squares didn't have dots? Okay, let's take a look. So we know that we have all 5 and 3 more. So 5, 6, 7, 8 of those squares had dots. 2 of the squares were empty. And altogether, there are 10 squares. Let's just do one more. Here we go. Okay, how many of those squares had dots? How many of those squares were empty? Okay, let's double check. So let's look here. So how many of the squares had dots? Oh, well, I see 6. 5, 6. How many of the squares were empty? Well, we know down here, if they were all full, there'd be 5, and we know that 1 and 4 more would make another 5. And so we have 6 dots. We have 6 squares that have dots, and we have 4 squares that are empty. So we will continue to be working with looking at the dots on a 10 frame and seeing how many squares have dots and how many are empty. Okay, Mrs. Foster has this really cool game called Bump 5. And in kindergarten, not only do you need to know the numbers that go together to make 5, but you need to be able to add joining numbers together. And you also need to be able to subtract, that's breaking numbers apart within the number 5. So I have a game for us that's going to help reinforce that skill. We're going to be working on subtraction today. So we're breaking those numbers apart. So Mrs. Foster just grabbed a piece of paper. And of course, this is where you'd want to pause and get your piece of paper. And I drew 12 circles. Some of my circles are better than others. And then I wrote the numbers 0 through 5, one number in each square, and I did that twice. Now, the other thing that you will need is you will need some type of marker. And this is a game that you can play with a partner or a pretend partner. So for example, maybe you could use mini chocolate chips as one of your markers and use Cheerios as another marker. You could use dimes as one of your markers, and you could use pennies as another marker. Just use what you have at home. I have my colored counters that I have from school, so that's what I'm going to use. The other thing that you'll need to do is you could either make cards, or if you had a set of playing cards, you just want to find and use the numbers, the ace, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you could pretend that one of the jacks is a 0. I just went ahead and I have digit cards with the digits 0 through 5. So you could also make up your own set of cards. So this is how we play the game. I'm going to move this down so that you can see the game board. And I've got my cards and I've got them all mixed up. And I'm going to choose 2 cards at a time. So I'll play, you guys will play against me. So I have a 4 and a 1. So 4 minus 1. Now, if you think of subtraction, you can also use addition to help you. So if you have a 4 and there's a 1, 1 is what goes with 1 to make 4? 3. And so because 3 plus 1 equals 4. So I get to cover up a 3 right here. Okay, now it's your turn. Oh, you guys have a 4 and a 5. We want to subtract from that bigger number. What's 5 minus 4? Now I could count back 4 times, but I might lose track of my count. So again, if I know, oh, I have 4, what goes with 4 to make 5? Well, it's 1. So 5 minus 4 equals 1. So you guys are using the lighter, and so you get to cover a 1. Okay, here we go. I have a 2 and a 2. Oh, 2 minus 2. Well, if I have 2 and I minus 2, I have 0 left. So I get to cover up a 0. I'm hoping we get a bump real soon so I can show you what bump does. Oh, 5 and 3. 5 minus 3. Now again, I could count back 3 times, but I might lose track of my count. If I look more about, well, what goes with 3 to make 5? 2, then 5 minus 3 equals 2. Okay, let me get one of my counters out here and I'll cover up the 2. Okay, I'm going to pull 2 more cards. Oh, I have a 3 and a 1. So 3 minus 1. Now that might just be really easy for you to count, to know the number that comes before 3, which is 2. 3 minus 1 equals 2. Oh, now here is where bump comes along. Mrs. Foster has a 2 covered. You could choose to either bump Mrs. Foster off, or you could cover the other 2. Let's go ahead and bump Mrs. Foster off. She doesn't mind because it's all about the math. Okay, I've got my cards again. Oh, there I go. 3 minus 1. Well, 3, 1 less is 2. Okay, I'm going to not bump. I'm going to go ahead and cover up the other 2. Oh, a 0 and a 2. Okay, it's your guys' turn. 2 minus 0. Well, if you have 2 cookies and you don't eat any of the cookies, you still have 2. Now, you already have a marker on your 2, so you can put another marker on. Now, you've locked in that number. That means that Mrs. Foster, or whoever your partner, I cannot take this circle from you. That's locked in. Okay. Oh, easy peasy lemon squeezy. We've got 5 minus 0. What does that equal? Yeah, 5, because we know 0 plus 5 equals 5. So 5 minus 0 equals 5. Oh, that's our first 5, boys and girls. Okay, we'll just play until the end of this deck. Oh, look at here. 5 minus 4. Now I could count back 4 times, but I might lose track of my count. What if I do the parts of 5? So if what goes with 4 to make 5? 1. So I'm using addition. 4 plus 1 equals 5. So 5 minus 4 equals 1. Oh, again, here's an option. Mrs. Foster's on a 1, so you could choose to bump me off, or you could cover up the other one. Feel free to bump me off. Okay, here comes our next 2 cards. Oh, here we go. We've got a 4, and we're minusing 1. 4 minus 1. Oh, what's the number that comes right before 4? 3. So 4 minus 1 equals 3. And that's our first 3. Oh, nope. So I could bump you off if I wanted to, but I'm just going to cover here. Okay, this is our last round that we'll play. I've got a 2 and a 0. And I wish on the computer I could tell which way is the easiest way for you to see these, because I should almost be doing it probably like this. We're just going to do the best we can. 2 minus 0, what does that equal? 2. So now, look what you get to do. You get to bump Mrs. Foster off there. So you would continue playing the game. We might as well just do the last 2 cards. 3 minus 0. What does that equal? Well, you don't have to count anything back, so it's 3. So Mrs. Foster, she finally can't be bumped off of the 3. So then we would just shuffle the cards again and we would play. And our goal is to get all of the numbers covered up. And again, we are practicing subtracting within the number 5. And so I just like to call this game Bump 5, because you can bump people off of their circle. So I'm going to go ahead and come right back up here. All right, boys and girls, have a great day. Let's go ahead and do our math cheer. I've got my hand in. You go ahead and put your hands up. And on the count of 3, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Math is cool and tigers rule. Break. Have a beautiful day.